Tour rules, no sales pitches, but not everyone knows who you are, so if you can just make a very brief introduction, who you are, where you work, and why you work there.
Shall we start with me?
Yeah, go on.
I'm Georgia. I work at JA Media, also known as John Ayling. We're a small independent agency. I'm the head of digital ops and innovation, which I can't say I love the title at times, but it basically means I'm working on some of the more boring stuff like processes, and then the more exciting things like CTV projects, which is probably why I'm here today. And apologies for the cold as well. Yeah, I'll try not to cough and sneeze too much.
Chris?
Chris Hock from WhaleTV. We are the leading independent connected TV operating system. Probably the best secret in connected TV. We have over 41 million monthly active TVs deployed around the globe, and I run monetization for the platform.
Hi, I'm Pippa Scaife. I'm VP of Global Partnerships at NBCUniversal, which means I do a lot of sales and a bit of strategy, mainly in the digital world, a lot in the CTV world. NBCUniversal is a global media powerhouse. Is that too salesy, Jamie? Yeah, we have film, sport, TV, and a lot of CTV within that.
Hello, I'm James Wilhite, head of product for Publica. We have a CTV ad server and server-side ad insertion platform. Keep it simple.
Hi, I'm James Grant. I look after CTV strategy for Equativ. Very similar to Publica, we are a tech platform and monetization with ad server and SSAI, SSP and demand-side services.
So to make things simple, we put two Jameses together, so we're going to go for JW and JG, just so that I don't get confused. So, Georgia, I'm going to start with you. We've got to answer this question about, is CTV bringing new money and new brands to the market? You're the customer. What do you think?
I would say there's a combination of places where the money's coming from at the moment. For the most part, we are seeing linear budget being kind of transferred over into the CTV space, but we're seeing a bit come from digital. We are seeing a bit come from sort of new testing pots as well, which is obviously very exciting and what we want to see a bit more of. With our sort of key clients that have been spending in the CTV space so far this year, as I say, it has been more from linear, and I think at John Ayling, we are very much, we are the sort of underdog agency, right? So we've got clients that have got massively sort of competitors with loads and loads of budget, and we've got to go up against them with much smaller budgets and try and, try to stand up to those sort of powerhouses. So one of the reasons we've switched a bit from linear to the CTV space is because that specific client, they've got quite specific sort of target audiences, and within the CTV space, it's so much easier to sort of use that more specific targeting, especially with the likes of sort of Prime Video, etc. So we can get, we're having a lot less wastage with our budget. I know there's, linear's incredible. Obviously, I'd love to say there's no wastage there, but when you don't have the same budgets as your competitors, you've really got to focus in that budget a bit more to kind of make sure that you're delivering the best you can for our clients.
But you don't have a CTV budget separate to a TV budget. You have an AV budget, I assume.
For the most part, yeah. There are some clients which will separate them out, but what we're trying to do is look at it in a holistic sort of way. So if we do get a CTV budget or an AV budget, we generally try and challenge that a bit and kind of say, this space should be holistic. We might be planning in the 3 different silos of sort of linear, BVOD and CTV, but that budget needs to be looked at holistically to make sure that we're spending it in the best way, in the best places possible. Good answer. I'm coming back to that at the end. Any other thoughts, Pippa?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo a lot of that, to be honest. I think it's a bit broader than that, if I'm honest. I think CTV budgets are coming in from all directions at the moment. There is definitely a lot of budget that's coming over from linear. I think there's a misconception that CTV budget is budget that has been taken out of linear and moved over to CTV, whereas in reality, what we see is that there's a lot of additive budget going into CTV, so where I think advertisers have recognized that linear and CTV are not mutually exclusive. They can play a really complementary role. And if you look at the programming strategies that are starting to happen as broadcasters shift towards streaming, that's really important. Like if I look at our Peacock programming strategy in the US, a show that airs on Bravo, which is our kind of premium reality channel, will then air the next day on Peacock. The overlap in those two audiences is very small, so only 7% will watch both. So if you want to own that space, you've got to be in CTV and in linear. So there's new money coming into CTV from those heritage brands who understand the importance of that kind of big screen impact. However, I think as CTV becomes more sophisticated and, you know, to George's point, that targeting becomes more precise, we're starting to see it being used as a bit more of a performance driver, and we're seeing budgets come over from social and even a bit of search from the conversations that I have. And I think what's most exciting about that is how we're opening up new environments to those brands, because you know, you think about something like live sports, which is obviously at the forefront of streaming conversations right now. Historically, live sports has been, I would say, fairly cost prohibitive for a lot of brands. You know, as we've moved from a one-to-many to a one-to-one opportunity around live sports, suddenly you have a chance for much newer digitally native entrants in the advertising world to move into that space. And we have seen real anecdotes of that happening. When we had the Olympics over the summer, we enabled programmatic, and 90% of the brands who were coming through buying programmatically against the Olympics were new advertisers to the game. So we actually had more advertisers in this Olympics than we had in Rio and Tokyo put together. And we drove $500 million of revenue from brands who had never been in the Olympics before. Whereas if you look back over time, typically you have kind of the same brands sponsoring in those environments every 4 years. So I think there is a real shift, and it's exciting to see that.
Do you have a problem with shit ad creative, or was it all right?
Well, I mean, I think creative's still a bit of a barrier to entry, to be honest. So if we weren't so if we weren't so selective about the creative that can be used in those environments, probably we would have seen a much larger number of brands who wanted to advertise in that space. But we are still very regulated and process-driven when it comes to the creative that will come in there. So no is the short answer.
Good. Either James, JG, JW?
Yeah, I can go. So we have one of our publishers who has seen 156,000 unique brands, A domains, this year.
Globally or?
Globally.
Yeah.
Yep. And that is also taking into account that they're blocking on specific IAB categories, preventing certain advertiser domains coming through. They're using our creative review tool to make sure that the brands that are showing are the brands they want showing, just to answer your shit creative question. So these are quality brands, and some are small businesses, local brands, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of new budget coming in from brands that aren't making their way into linear, and maybe traditionally they're seen in other spaces. To echo what Pippa was saying, we are seeing that budget shift from other budgets as well because of the addressability that's inherent to CTV. A buyer can see the device ID, given any privacy regulation. So you can see the device ID that's coming through and target that user, that audience, and bring budgets in that way.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that from our point of view as well. Very similar to the panel, we're seeing two pieces. Shift of linear monies. So we have a client, RMB, in Belgium, and we do ad serving and decisioning for them. And they actually ran dynamic ad insertion during the Euros through every game. And that really, there was a real change for them in terms of the advertisers they saw coming in, but also switching monies across. It's hard, like forecasting live during live sports, hard. But kudos to them, they're experimenting, they're pushing it, and they're bringing monies across. There's also a piece, and Pippa just called it out, about performance. We're seeing that too. So because historically our business was smart ad server, so we have a lot of legacy coming from display, and we're starting to see display, as we know, is either sort of peaked or waning, and we're starting to see those advertisers start to experiment in a combination of online video, streaming and CTV, and push for performance metrics. So there's definitely new money coming across.
Cool. And Chris, from the OS world?
I'd agree. The promise here on connected TV is the targeting capabilities hopefully should bring in some new advertisers so you get more effective spend. You look at, in the US, major broadcaster might have 600 advertisers. Google might have 6 million, right? So we probably want to increase from traditional broadcast to bring in new advertisers, maybe not 6 million, but that's the promise of connected TV. I would say what we're seeing on WhaleTV right now is definitely linear campaigns, brands that you would see on linear running on connected TV. I would say we are seeing some new campaigns that we might not see on linear TV. I think these are around challenger brands that maybe would be going through an unwired network for an efficiency play. And we're seeing campaigns from, that maybe skew younger audiences and niche products.
Cool. So I apologise for this question in advance because it's a really bad question, but it links to my final question, which is really important. So one of you, please tell me what you all mean by CTV. I don't want 5 or different answers, but one of you take it on because it's just nonsense.
I am happy to do that because I do have some strong feelings about this. And do stop me if I start ranting.
That's fine.
With my agency recently, we've kind of gone through a bit of an education piece, and part of that is the definition of CTV, because obviously the literal definition is just a connected device. And on that device, you can still get linear, you can still get BVOD, but you've got these stats out there that's like, CTV's reaching 80% of the UK population, right? And actually, a significant amount of those 80% are still not reachable through advertising, or only through a very, very small amount, say now that Prime's come along. So I do think we kind of need to look at that sort of definition and recategorize. So in our agency, we've kind of simplified it. If it's inventory on a connected TV device and it's not linear and it's not BVOD, we're calling it CTV. But again, to call it CTV, that's still just a term that means something completely different if you look at the IAB definition.
Not linear being not streamed, or not linear broadcast?
Streamed linear, broadcast linear.
I'm being pedantic.
So
I know that's a big part of the problem.
So at the end of the day, what is called CTV is up to the buyer, right? You're buying, how much you want to spend is up to you. I was thinking earlier today though, like imagine you go to the cinema and you buy a ticket for 20 quid, you go to the cinema and everybody's like, gather around my phone, we're gonna watch Oppenheimer, right? Like if somebody's willing to pay for that, to go see that on a small device, so be it. And that's the same thing with CTV. If you're willing to pay that rate for a CTV inventory, then it's CTV.
It all links to the end, we can move on. So, what's holding the market back? So you're saying, you've all said, there are brands, new brands coming onto CTV, but some of it's moving from linear. How does this market accelerate and grow? Is it just adoption, or are there other challenges that are stopping growth? Customer.
What's holding us back? There's a few things, I'd say. I mean, I've just had my rant on definitions. Obviously, if those were kind of sorted and a lot more straightforward, it would make the education piece a lot more straightforward. I think education's still a big one. As I just said, we've done a big piece within my agency recently, and almost immediately off the back of that, we had 3 or 4 CTV briefs come in within the space of a week. So I think educating people, we want to then educate clients to know, like, this is what our definition of CTV is. This is the kind of inventory we want to be delivering on. And as well, like, obviously every agency is different, every company is different, but we have a really strong sort of AV heritage at my agency, particularly DRTV, and we've got quite specific ways of planning, so like line-by-line AV plans. So we kind of wanted to replicate that as much as possible in the CTV space, rather than, we've seen a lot of places where CTV is just this mass, and it could be anything from Prime Video to sort of, sorry to say, the dregs of like fast inventory, and it could be anything. You don't know what you're going to get on a plan. So we've really tried to come at it with that sort of line by line. If we're going to plan it for our clients, we're going to know where we're delivering, what we're delivering, and get as much information back for them as possible. So yeah, that's where we've come from it, and that's, I guess, one of the biggest things we've seen as a sort of setback in our sort of way. The only other thing I'd add to that is pricing, because some of the more premium CTV partners are still extremely expensive.
All about price, it's about value. James?
Yeah.
Grant?
I think it's interesting, Georgie, because you call out education and you call out, and then the question before was, what's the definition of CTV? So if we don't know what the definition is in this room, how on earth are we going to educate advertisers what it is, what the change is, how that rolls through in terms of benefits to them of having it on the plan? There was a lot of talk yesterday about how do we make it simpler? How do we make it easier to buy? So I think the definitions are critical to what we do going forward, and I think that's probably what's holding things back. We always talk about measurement, and you can't have this conversation, I think, without measurement, because if you can't measure it, you know, why would the advertiser buy it? They won't, because they're going to buy things they want to be able to measure and report on. So I think they go hand in hand, but the education piece is critical.
And is George's point about environments, content classification, is that key going forward, or is it the Wild West? Is that okay?
I think it depends who you're thinking about and where you're expecting the money to come from, because it's all well and good talking about education and definition and, you know, detailed line-by-line plans. But to the point about definition, actually, the majority of ad spend that's sitting with social platforms, for example, which is where we all moan about revenues having gone, they don't care what the definition of CTV is. They don't care what the definition of any platform they're buying against is. What they care about is how easy it is to execute. So to your point, you know, that simplification piece, and how quickly they can turn stuff around. And I don't know if anyone here saw James Rook do his keynote yesterday, but I thought he summarized this really eloquently, because what he effectively said was, TV is really hard. The business that we have built around TV is very time consuming, it's very resource heavy. It is not working in the same way that a platform like social is working. You know, if you want to spend with Google or Meta on a Friday evening at the end of December and you want to turn it around really quickly, you can do it. You know, you can log in on your laptop with the credit card in your bedroom and you can turn around a huge amount of ad spend. If you want to buy into CTV from a premium provider, you need to get a line-by-line detailed plan from your agency for the most part. So we talk about wanting to compete in that space and to bring in revenues from that area, but we have not created an ecosystem that is set up to do that. You know, we have, to your question about shit creative, that it's a heavily quality controlled process, which is right, but actually there are loads of Gen AI tools that have simplified that we haven't introduced at scale. We don't have real-time dashboards where you can see your performance or where you can manage your campaigns yourself. We certainly haven't done any of those things at scale. You know, there are businesses that have introduced some of those measures. NBCUniversal is one of them. We have Peacock Ad Manager, which enables a certain amount of self-service, but it's not on the scale of that kind of consolidated platform that we talk about in social. So I think it's been talked about a lot over the last couple of days. We need to figure out as an industry how we collaborate and introduce those tools to simplify the process in order to continue to bring in these new digitally native D2C style brands who are going to be able to leverage CTV.
We're going to come back to that at the end as well.
Yeah, I'll throw a monkey wrench in here just to complicate the picture. So on our connected TVs, we have a digital tuner that tunes in just about any station for free-to-air content, displays it to the user. Obviously, the HDMI 1 with the cable box is also available.
Yep.
So it's kind of, well, is half of your connected TV good old-fashioned linear and the other half, you know, CTV? I think Georgia raised a good point. Maybe it's the distinction is, you know, when you can use data and then you're getting data on the return path, and when you have dynamic ad insertion capabilities on the platform, you know, maybe that's the distinction from at least a tech point of view. I think what's the hurdle on this? That's probably from an organization point of view of, you know, Pippa, to your point of getting everyone to move so the dollars are matching the viewing, right? Which has really gone to streaming, and you know, but there's a lot of organization change that has to happen to make that they haven't.
So people come to CTV, whatever it is, but anyway, people come to CTV. What are the use cases? Because, Georgia, you said in the past TV has been about brand, top of funnel, as well as, you called it DRTV, but there's performance as well. But in CTV, is it different use cases? Is it attracting, campaigns away from traditional digital platforms because it is about performance and targeting, etc.? Mr. JW?
Mr. JW. So again, going back to what I said earlier, the addressability of CTV is what would drive those budgets away. So if campaigns are targeted to specific audiences or maybe to contextual segments, things like that, maybe it adds on to day parting, time of day, prime time budgets. You get extra facets to your targeting that you're not able to get out of those other inventory sources.
Yeah. But going back to, so someone was talking about the brand, and we sort of got into this world about measurement. Yeah. If we're talking about brand fame, and we have a campaign that exists on linear and CTV, how does that measurement work? Is it just guesswork, or is there a route through that? Anyone?
I think you need an advertiser to answer that. Really.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, though, because we started to talk about two different use cases. We started to talk about performance metrics and talk about automated buying platforms and logins and the ability to pull those metrics and shift your budgets. That is a newer model of media transaction and outcome versus brand building, which is the more traditional sort of television model of that's what TV's famous for. It's for building brands like Mercedes. I think we still are stuck in this place, and 15th anniversary, we've been talking about it for a long time. How do we conflate the two things together? I don't know if this room has the answer yet, and I think that's the biggest challenge. We've got an old school way of measuring something that we know is super important for brand building, and we have a newer model of performance and tracking and metric-driven outcomes, and the two are coming together, but I don't think we're quite there in terms of overlapping them.
We're coming back to that. What are the KPIs then, if we are in performance? What are the KPIs, measures of success, or how do you judge if that campaign worked or not?
Well, on our side, we do have both sides of the coin. We do still have a lot of our CTV activities very much brand building, so we'll look at reach against our target audience. It's definitely one of the bigger ones. We do have a campaign live at the moment, which is quite exciting though, because I guess the actual campaign is we're just delivering to the target audience. There's not a massive amount of optimization at the moment in a lot of the sort of CTV space, in sort of the traditional programmatic sense of, tweaking all this, that, the other, etc. But in the back end, we're looking at conversion metrics, and I'm not going to name who we've got as a partner, but we've got all that set up in the back end. And although our CTV CPMs are a lot higher than our sort of DRTV CPMs, we're actually seeing quite similar CPAs coming off the back of that. I think the CTV is slightly higher, but a lot closer than we would have expected based on the sort of CPMs that we're buying on. So I think at the moment, on our side, it is still very much, we are buying it in the brand space. We haven't moved over to performance yet, but we're starting to see kind of, I guess, like the green springs of moving towards that sort of space and what that might look like in the future. And as I say, as a sort of fairly DRTV heavy agency on the AV side, I think sometime soon we'll be moving into that space a lot more on the CTV side.
Cool.
I would say I'd add one use case that may be a little unique for us at the West levels. Certainly we have the in-stream ads that are usually used for branding. But we also have the ability to, have real estate on the UI, right? So the masthead, the launcher page, when you go to the recommendations page or discovery page, and that is a tremendous branding opportunity you have someone who's making a decision about what to watch. So media and entertainment use case to present content. And then we can click through to open the application. If the user has the app installed, if they don't, they can install the app. And we can measure that stuff. So niche use case, that works out really well.
Cool.
Yeah, we're seeing partners come in for almost full funnel, I would say. Maybe not right at the bottom of the funnel, but certainly moving in that direction. I mean, CTV definitely is a brand building tool in much the same way that linear was, but actually, as we're introducing more data partners and more sophistication, that measurement is shifting. If I think about what we're doing on Peacock in the US, for example, with Walmart, where we're bringing in their retail media data and creating a kind of closed loop attribution system, we are able to get real measurability around purchase intent and decision making. And you know, it's not working in quite the same way as other digital platforms, but with things like QR codes and text to shop, you're able to push much more in that performance direction and measure it in real time. So I think we'll see much more movement in that direction and hopefully more money coming in as a result.
Cool. So changing gears, I guess, a little bit, sort of thinking about what's driving CTV viewing and CTV advertising environments. Where are you seeing the big upticks that either through your platform or your service or your buying platform that you're seeing that's driving adoption? We had a panel yesterday, feels like last week, but anyway, yesterday talking a lot about sport, and obviously that's been mentioned, you know, by James and Mark at NBCU and Warner Brothers Discovery, etc. Is that the the tentpole moment? Is that still a major thing, or is it the drama from Netflix and Amazon?
I think that sports drive high concurrency at a given point, but if we're talking about consistency of CTV and what's bringing people there every day, because there aren't a high number of sports on CTV currently, what's driving them there is, in my opinion, comfort television. You get a lot of fast channels where you can go and watch something that should be in syndication or old movies, things like that, and you could just turn it on and watch it in the same way you would watch cable television. I don't know about anybody else, but for me, I remember so many times growing up where I would just go through all 500 channels that I had and get back to 2 really depressed that nothing was on or everything was on commercial. But now,
go through them again.
Yeah, and start all over again. But now I can go to a channel that only shows the content that I'm interested in watching. I could watch Friends all day long if I want to. There's a lot of things you can do that you couldn't do before.
Yeah, and I'd argue the role of the OS that we view was WhaleTV. The role of the OS is really to simplify that experience and personalize it. Right, you can have different profiles for different family members, and the content that they watch is surfaced higher for each individual family member, right? So I think that's one of the advantages of CTV about driving. It's what content, well, it's kind of all of it, right? I watch sports in my household, but there might be my wife who watches reality TV, and we can have our different profiles and our different viewing.
I really like you were talking earlier about the Olympics and the NBCU experience of being able to watch any sport, any athlete, whatever. Can you expand on how that worked for NBCU last year?
Yeah, I can, and I'm actually going to wildly disagree with you about sport not driving. I mean, Peacock had 13,000 hours of sports this year, so there's a lot of sport happening. Granted, not quite as much as we've seen historically on linear, but it's moving. And actually, when we look at the big spikes in our subs, it's been driven by things like our NFL wildcard game, which was the most streamed event in US history when it was broadcast, by the Olympics, as you mentioned, and then by big ticket movie premieres like Oppenheimer and Twisters, which really drove up our subs. Now, those viewers do then stay for things like the comfort TV viewing, but it's those big ticket moments that are really driving the new subscribers. And CTV offers a totally different way of introducing sports to that audience. Like if you think about the Olympics, which is obviously such a vast event, suddenly you watch the Olympics and you don't have to watch through the stuff you're not interested in to get to the sprinting or whatever it is. If you're a fencing fanatic or a judo fanatic or a breakdancing fanatic this year, you can tune in and just watch that. So it creates a much larger supply of content and therefore inventory for advertisers to sit against. And it also creates an opportunity for more creativity, I think, in and around that sport. Like, I'm sure a lot of people in this room didn't think we'd see a day where Snoop Dogg would be the face of the Olympics, but here we are in 2024, and he was, and that's what drove a lot of our viewership. So sports is really, I think, pushing things forward from a creativity and a viewership point of view.
And does the tech, the support the concurrency requirement for, you're watching a Premier League, you get millions of ad requests in one break, in one pod, whatever. We've had a couple of examples of events that might have not gone as well as people hoped recently across the pond. But, can you support that many ad requests in one pod? I'm going down to that end, the people that know about technology.
So it's going to depend. Like the examples that Pippa just gave, the wildcard game. I did subscribe to Peacock just to watch that game, and I
Thank you.
remained a member. But all of that was simulcast, right? Like all of those ads were already sold out. So I didn't get any programmatic spend coming to me while I was watching that. My guess is if that game was streamed fully programmatically, we would have had issues with timeouts through the SSPs and DSPs through the high concurrency of people that watch something like an NFL playoff game. So it's not solved yet. The high concurrency, getting all of those people sitting down, watching the same show at the same time across the entire world, the technology ecosystem is not ready to handle that level of concurrency just yet.
Cool.
I'm going to expand on that a little bit. I think the ecosystem is ready. I think the business models aren't. So theoretically, can we manage the concurrency? I think we can. Like from a technology basis, you can. But can you go and sit with a CFO and put a plan in place and say, this is the concurrency sort of structure we want to build, and we've got to have this much latency and rollover? And they say, well, that seems super inefficient. Like, really, are we going to get that level of viewing? How are you going to forecast? You're going to fill all the ads? So I think from a tech point of view, yes, the structures are there. From an economics point of view, we're still learning as an industry.
First red card, use the word latency and rollover, which no one in the room understands.
Well, maybe, so I know some do.
So
I would say we have a proof point on that, right? What NBC did the Olympics and the Super Bowl the same week. When was it? Last year, 2 years ago?
2 years ago, but not programmatically enabled for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe 26.
Right before the pre-game was, and then the post-game afterward. And they had a lot of concurrency, and the testing around it was, good point.
So if you put sport to one side, and to a degree you take the major streamers out, so Netflix, Amazon, etc., with all this CTV environment, does it mean that we're actually getting more content, or is it better curation? And, is it just because you don't need to schedule, you can see on demand or whatever? Are we seeing more content, or is it just the same old shit in a different way?
A lot of the content you see, at least in the United States, the content I see on CTV hasn't been available for me to watch because they're older things, older movies. Like I would have to buy them in order to watch them. So I wouldn't say it's new content in that way, but it's new to a new generation. It's new to the people watching it at that moment. So I don't think that there's a lot, at least when you're talking about a programmatic space. If you go look at Netflix, Disney Plus, like their or NBC, content creation powerhouses, right? Like that is what's driving people to those apps to watch it, is because you can only watch that new content there.
So specifically choosing to watch at the time, so a richer, more engaging programming environment because you've chosen that content, a better advertising solution is your supposition.
Yes, and just as you keep doing, I'll expand on that later because I have something to add on your last question.
You don't get control of what's later,
yeah.
I do.
I mean, you've done it like 5 times. I don't even know what your last question's going to be.
We've now got 4 minutes, so we're moving on to the last section. So, here's my view. I'm doing a Jeff Eels. No, I'm not doing that bad. So 2 years ago, one of the major broadcasters in the UK said, within 5 years, all of our inventory will be the equivalent of ad servable. All of our inventory, that's linear, broadcast, obviously on demand and streaming. Technically, the capability is there. Operationally, the systems are not. But why the hell are we looking in the rear view mirror about how the world used to work when in a few years' time, everything will be ad-servable or decisionable, should we stop talking about CTV and think about TV in totality and how you manage across all campaigns? Or should we just think about the self-interest of certain parties in the industry that want to push a certain sector? Over to you. That's my soapbox.
I'll go first. I say yes. So I think
you need to expand on that.
I will. But I think yes, we should think of TV as a whole. So you're right. 2 years into that 5-year timeline that person laid out, it feels like everything's moving in the right direction. I think the sort of total structure of TV is correct in that way, and I think we're getting to a place where the budgets can be aligned across everything. Why would we keep looking in the rearview mirror? That's old economics. There were 2 things today that jumped out. One was in the Group M data presentation. She openly said there's not enough spend going against the viewing.
Kate said, not she.
Thank you. Sorry, Kate. Apologies. Kate said there's not enough spend relative to the share of viewing. So that's the buy side saying we're not keeping pace with where the audience goes. And Alex then from Channel 4 then called out that viewers now have as much choice as they've ever had. And teenagers and youngsters coming through who have grown up with phones, they have infinite choice. So I think if you look at that, looking ahead rather than in the rearview mirror, that's just all TV, all content. Like we should start bracketing it all together.
So to bring that together, what needs to happen? I'm kind of assuming measurement is the key element. I'm not looking to Mr. Grant for that one. Anyone?
I mean, yes. I would say we already think about them as a complementary set of inventory. I don't think we, look at linear as something, as a dinosaur in the past that we have to treat totally differently. We plan our campaigns in the US, certainly, with linear plus CTV. We use a one-platform total audience tool that brings them together and finds the same audience across those different platforms. That said, CTV offers a very different set of capabilities, and if you ignore those capabilities in order to bring them together, then we're all missing a trick. We wouldn't be on this panel if it weren't for that. I think we've moved to a point where we've probably done what we need to be able to plan them together as well as we can. There's probably a bit more measurement that we can move towards, but I actually don't think we're at a state anymore where we think about them, one legacy, one new, as totally separate entities.
Yeah, and it's similar from an agency perspective. We're very much trying to consider it with one budget and as holistically as possible. So although we are still planning them quite differently when you get down to those silos because they are bought quite differently, I think our long-term goal is very much for, we look at the budget holistically, we plan it holistically, and hopefully at some point we'll get the sort of planning tools and measurement, which I'd say in the UK is still lacking in places, so that we can do that better in the future.
So there's a lot of work to do, but ultimately you're saying in whatever period, whether it be 2 years or 3 years, it's about the use case, not the platform or the delivery mechanism. It's about, can you fulfill a use case and then measure it or count it across the different devices? So we kind of need to change the narrative in the industry. Is that right? Well, I'm putting words in your mouth, so if you disagree, I'm just ending it. Yes? No? You can disagree.
Everyone's hedging their bets.
Yeah.
No, I think that sounds about right. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a massive opportunity, and we should actually accelerate the solution, not complain about the problem that happened 2 years ago. With that, I'm done. Thank you.